Recently, I picked up a book called Why I Became an Atheist by John Loftus. It's a book that's gotten some attention on various websites, and some people have directed me to this book or mentioned this book in one way or another to me, and so I picked it up. Some are touting this book as, one of the greatest defenses of atheism. The man who wrote the book, John Loftus, is a former Christian minister. He tells his story rather candidly at the beginning of the book, and that's an interesting story in and of itself that perhaps in another presentation I'll talk about it. But I'd like to offer some reflections on certain portions of this book. There's so many things in here that require some response that it would be difficult to do so in any short number of presentations, because there's so many chapters in the book that address different issues that one, in responding to it, would leave himself vulnerable to the charge that I'm selectively choosing one thing over another. But there are two things in particular that I like to spend a little bit of time thinking about and offering a few reflections on. One of them is his response to Aquinas' cosmological arguments, or versions of the cosmological argument, that's found on pages 82 and 83 of this book. The reason why I want to start with that is because I think it gives a good illustration of what I think is the weakness of the book, or one of the weaknesses of the book. I think the author is certainly an intelligent man. The author certainly has studied a lot. He has a fair amount of experience within Christian circles. He spent some time as a minister. I do think he's got some blinders on, though. He makes it very clear early on in the book that he rejects Catholicism, for example. He doesn't seem to have much knowledge, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but based on the book, it doesn't seem that he has much real grasp of the more traditional Orthodox versions of Christianity. By that I mean the Catholic and Orthodox traditions of the Church. He certainly has some grasp of the Protestant Reformed tradition, or the Protestant tradition in general. But it seems like his primary experience is within certain forms and offshoots of Protestantism. He starts his experience, he mentions Pentecostalism, he mentions the Churches of Christ, or certain branches of the Churches of Christ. He mentions the Baptists, that he went to a Baptist church there when he was trying to hold on to his faith at the end. He goes to Wheaton College, so he clearly has some exposure to various forms of evangelical Christianity, Reformed Christianity, but he quickly discards Catholicism. He mentions that he's in his early years of life, he's raised in a nominal Catholic home, but they don't really practice their faith, and he doesn't really learn that faith. He mentions in a footnote that he quickly discards Catholicism because of things like the Inquisition or witch hunts and that sort of thing. He thinks that discredits the Catholic tradition, which I find rather strange and short-sighted, because the Catholic Church, the standing and falling of the Catholic tradition does not depend on the time-conditioned sort of reactions to social events or how they respond to political and religious crises of different times. The Catholic Church is pretty clear about the scope of its authority and of its tradition and what that protects and covers. So there's no Catholic today that I know of who would defend everything that the Church has ever done down through the centuries as being, even things that are done sort of as in general the Church's stance on a certain thing doesn't necessarily mean that it's part of the core of the tradition or the dogmatic core of the Catholic faith. So my point is that I think that his understanding of Christianity is very narrow, and that's important to understanding his book, I think, because in his chapter where he offers, I think, what is the core of his presentation, which is what he calls the outsider's test of faith. The outsider's test of faith, I think, is based on a certain understanding of Christianity. If he had a wider, broader understanding of the Catholic tradition, for instance, I think that he might find that there are other alternatives available to him rather than the more narrow ones that he presents. Let me try to explain that just briefly. I know I'm speaking in some generalities here. He seems to consistently want to set up this contrast between the Christian tradition or a particular local expression of the Christian tradition in a particular church or a particular denomination of Christianity. And he wants to set that in contrast to other world religions. And the way that he sets up the outsider's test of faith is that it tends to be the case that people, whatever they're raised in or whatever they grow up in, whatever kind of religious tradition that they grow up in or community that they grow up a part of, that will probably define what religious tradition they'll be committed to for the rest of their life. And so because that's the case, then we should draw the conclusion that most people accept a religious tradition because of sociological reasons or cultural reasons, not because they've studied it and come to a studied conclusion or a reasonable conclusion about that religious faith. Because we are inclined to accept what we culturally are conditioned to accept, Loftus argues we should take a basic skeptical stance toward our religious predispositions or cultural religious expressions. So that if I grow up, say for example, in a Christian environment, it's assumed that I will be a Christian. If I grow up in a Muslim environment, I'll be a Muslim. I grew up in a Buddhist one, I'll be a Buddhist. So those non-rational causes of religious faith should incline a person toward fundamental skepticism toward religious claims, because, he argues, they are probably false. And the reason why they're probably false, he argues, is because there are so many different forms of Christianity out there, or religion rather, there are so many different forms of religion out there that of the many thousands of possibilities, we happen to be raised in a particular one and we happen to believe that one. And so the odds are we would believe something different elsewhere, and because there are so many options that we would have believed had we grown up in them, then it's probably the case, because our particular religious expression is only one of many thousands or many possibilities. It is probably the case that the one that I chose or the one that I accepted is probably not objectively true, if in fact it's the case that they can't all be true simultaneously. Now he admits that if some type of universalism is true, or that particular religious beliefs don't really matter in the end, then we could argue that the universal sort of religious feeling or something like that could be true, while the particular religious expressions are probably false in respect to the different claims that they make. And I think that actually, that particular point is probably one that is worth dwelling on just a little bit, because it might indeed be the case, and I think there's a modified version of what Mr. Loftus has argued here or offered here as a possibility that we should consider. I think one of the things that is very important to keep in mind is that it seems as if most human beings are predisposed toward accepting the worldview of the culture in which they find themselves. And most of the time, those worldviews tend to be religious ones, religious in some sense, that they involve a tradition, they involve an understanding of what reality is, they involve a set of orientations or perspectives on ultimate reality, more often than not including some type of divine reality or God. So for instance, in the case of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which those combined constitute about half the world's population, about half the people in the world receive a tradition or receive a religious understanding of things that predisposes them toward believing that there's one God, there's a personal God who created the world. There are other religions, the Far Eastern religions, for example, some of which do not profess a belief in God as such, but they do believe that there is an ultimate sort of reality that we can touch into or tap into through some type of disciplining of the mind and directing of the mind and a search for peace. In the case of Hinduism, there is an explicit belief in divine realities. In Hinduism in its highest form, there's the belief that there's one supreme reality, and everything in the world is in some sense or another an expression of that supreme reality. And then in others, like in Buddhism, they don't talk in particular about God and are often considered atheistic in that sense, that they don't profess a belief in God, but they do believe that there is a more mysterious type of ultimate essence of reality that we, through training the mind and through a process of enlightenment, can come into a kind of oneness with that supreme reality. All of which I think, at least most atheists, at least Mr. Loftus seems to be one of those, does not seem particularly inclined to be open to any of these types of religious faith. I think the point that I would want to suggest here with respect to this outsider's test of faith is a couple of things. Number one, to say that because we have a tendency to believe what we have been taught, first of all, to my mind, suggests that we have a fundamental openness to, first of all, trusting those who have come before us and those who have handed on to us a worldview, a way of looking at things. But secondly, it also suggests that because that worldview tends to be universally, no matter what expression it is, whether it be a Christian one, a Muslim one, a Jewish one, a Hindu one, a Buddhist one, and then a host of smaller expressions of religion of various sorts, whatever that expression might be, human beings seem to have this fundamental openness to the transcendent, or to something more than just the sensory world. That a scientific worldview alone, just a kind of scientism, that the scientific method alone gives to us what is true, if what I'm saying is correct, or if the religious perspective is right, then that worldview will ultimately be rejected by most cultures and most people. And the reason why is because it doesn't satisfy an inner longing for a worldview that will answer to or will explain the more religious longings of the human person. The idea that's presented here in Mr. Loftus's book and in various atheist things that I see, the very idea that human beings are sort of have these ideas foisted upon them of belief in God, like we might have a belief in Santa Claus or fairies or that sort of thing, and that those ideas are equivalent, seems to me to be a very naive and surface understanding, a very shallow understanding of human beings. The belief in God in its highest expressions, in its most pure expressions, in its most refined expressions, the belief in God is a vision about or an understanding of the deepest impulses and longings of human beings. Yes, there are different expressions of that in the world in the various different religions, and I don't think the various different religions is an either-or situation. It's not either they're all right or none of them are right, or we must presume a position of skepticism with respect to all of them. I think we can take a stance of a cautious openness to the fact that human beings are religious beings. We're looking for fulfillment in religious terms. And the common experience of human beings throughout the world, where we have a fundamental openness to that, a tendency to believe that, to me, says something different than that we should be skeptical about it. It says to me that we should be open to it. Now that, again, doesn't mean that every religious faith is equally as accurate in the interpretation of that experience. It doesn't mean that there can't be one religious faith that is more full or complete or more pure or perhaps more compelling upon analysis than the other expressions. Like in the case of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, these three religions are historically associated with each other and connected with each other. And therefore we can study them historically and we can see where they deviate from each other and where their points of contact and difference are. But we can also identify and acknowledge the similarities that exist between these religions. And just because most people don't have the training, the background, the time to be able to analyze all those things in their finer details doesn't mean it can't be done. And it doesn't imply that because everyone can't do that, that we should just give up the quest, or that we should take a position of skepticism that all of these must probably be false. Instead, we could take a position of saying that they all, in some sense or another, are true. Insofar as they all give witness to a deep longing for human beings for religious fulfillment. And then we can go through the analysis of the particular religions. What about those who don't have the background, the skill, the time, or whatever to analyze those differences? In that case, those people, from a Catholic perspective, will be judged based upon what they know. There's the presumption that people will follow the religious faith that they have been given. And that God, who knows the heart, God who knows every person, knows what we are capable of and what we have been given. And God, who knows what we have been given and knows what we are capable of, will judge us and will evaluate us based upon what we had access to, not based on what we could not know. So I think there's an inclusivist position here that helps us to avoid both pluralism and exclusivism. And I'll have to stop here, and maybe I can explain that distinction in my next presentation.